the Tea House Chat. I'm here with Luka Lesson. He's a performance poet. How did you get into poetry and performing poetry?
Long story. I'll do the long story. I started writing hip-hop, started writing rap about 8 to 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I discovered slam poetry or Def Jam poetry on YouTube, which is a TV show that was on HBO in the States for about 6 years, which is just a collection of poets doing amazing stuff. And I started going to events in Brisbane, where I'm from. And then I started my own event because there weren't enough events in Brisbane. So me and a friend of mine started an event called Words or Whatever, which is still going. And then I moved to Melbourne, started meeting a lot of different poets and discovering things and competing. And then I competed in the Melbourne Poetry Festival Slam, and I won that in 2010. And then I competed in the National Slam. It was the third year competing in the National Slam. For those of you that don't know what Slam is, it's like a competition of poetry where there's judges in the crowd, and it's a lot of fun. And it's not meant to be about money or anything like that, or winning really. It's just about making it an exciting event. And so I entered into the Australian Slam and I won the Victorian. I came second in the Victorian state final, and then I went to the national final and won the national final at the end of 2011. And then I've just been touring around the world and around Australia since then, pretty much, doing workshops and performing and doing some hip-hop stuff and releasing an album that's like half hip-hop, half poetry. But that's where my roots are, I guess, in hip-hop, but then poetry is kind of what's come out of it.
Thank you. So what interests you, like what inspires you? Is it poetry, written poetry? Is it more from the hip-hop or...?
I don't read so much. People are like, oh, I'm a big fan of T.S. Eliot. What's your favorite T.S. Eliot? Or what's your favorite Pablo Neruda? Or what's your favorite? And I'm like, I just make something up. No, I do read some of this stuff, but not much at all, to be honest. I'm more influenced by oral tradition. I'm more influenced by Indigenous Australian storytelling and storytelling all over the world, hip hop, music, other poets, going to a poetry event and seeing someone or seeing videos. I think videos are becoming the real kind of tangible objects that can be sold, or that is like where it's like my library. YouTube is kind of like my library. I find really beautiful videos and see different poets from around the world doing their thing, from South Africa to Berlin to the States to New Zealand. There's poets doing really amazing things all over the world. And even that word poet or poetry kind of bores me sometimes. It bored me at school. I was never interested in it. But when it comes to expressing yourself, telling a story, working with words, that's what I'm into.
Thanks. So you said in school poetry bored you. It does sound, in school it's taught very classically. So what did interest you in school?
What did interest me in school? I was good at English, but I wasn't into the classics of poetry. I did a bunch of other stuff. I was more into humanities type stuff. I went to uni and I did Indigenous studies and anthropology at uni, and kind of more humanitarian ideas of what to study and what to look at, and social perspectives and studying human beings and what we are. But I was always into hip-hop, so at school that was interesting. And I didn't realize that hip-hop was poetry. I didn't realize that from my culture, my background's Greek, I didn't realize that there's such a long history of poetry in my culture. There's actually a long history of poetry in every culture in the world. And I think a lot of the kids that I was at school with would have really benefited from being told that, oh, you're Chinese, there's actually a really amazing history of poetry in China. Or you're Indonesian, there's just actually an amazing history of poetry. Or Aboriginal Australian, or from anywhere in the world, there's just all these traditions, you know, and we just get taught these classics that are totally culturally and historically kind of detached from most of the kids in the class. And I think even the kids that are from Anglo-Saxon backgrounds still felt kind of detached from them as well, in many ways. So I guess a lot of my work is spent working with young people and saying to them, it's cool, you can use whatever language you want, you can say whatever you want, and actually your funny conversations in the schoolyard are poetry. And there's all sorts of poetry that can be written. It doesn't need to sound like somebody else. In fact, it's meant to sound as much like you as possible, and I think that's the journey of an artist of any kind, of any genre, is to get to you, strip off the layers and get to you as much as possible.
That's excellent advice for anyone wanting to do this. Do you have any other advice for young people who are interested in performing?
Oh, the hot tips. The hot tips. Some people would say, other poets would say, read, write, listen to as much as you can, you know. I'm not really like that. I tend to say quality over quantity. Instead of writing 50 poems this year, write 5 amazing poems and work on them for 2 months each or more, you know. Make something that you really love, you know. I do agree with listening to a lot of poetry, but I also think just being inspired by the world is important. You don't have to worry about, because I think if you listen to too much, you start sounding like everybody, and I think it's also important to just listen to who you are and what you want to say, and that it comes from a passionate place, not a I want to write something pretty kind of place. That you actually don't start writing a poem until you have something to write about. It's always going to come easier. It's always going to be more relative. It's always going to hit people harder in the heart if you're speaking and writing from the heart. If you're just like, I want to write something about clouds because that's the task I've set for myself today, I don't necessarily think that's the best thing to do, although it will help with your vocab, etc. The other thing is get up on stage. Get up on stage as early as you can. I didn't start writing hip-hop till I was like 20, 21, which is super late for some people, but I had a lot of life experience. I'd lost a lot of friends. I'd been through some things, so I guess maybe I had something to write about. But if I'd gotten up on stage a lot earlier, I'd possibly, you know, like I think it's good when I like meeting people, young people. I met a guy the other day who's 19 who's been writing for 10 years. I'm like, that's really cool. So yeah, just jump in, and all those scary steps. I still have scary steps where I'm performing to bigger crowds than I thought I ever would, and I'm still like the 9-year-old kid that's performing to 5 people. You know, it still feels like that for me, but there's just bigger kind of steps. So the sooner you start making those steps, the better, I think.
Thank you. So do you, when you're writing something, do you start off writing it down or do you speak it first? What's your process?
I think I have, what sort of process? I think I have as many processes as I have poems. It never happens the same way twice. I'm working on a poem at the moment, and I was just thinking that I might use a process that I've taught but not used very much, where you play a song like a classical song, or a song that's not necessarily a hip-hop beat but something instrumental, and you write to the instrumental, so your poem has a rhythm to it, but then you take away the instrumental and your poem's left with an internal rhythm that it might not have had before. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is, yeah, definitely it just starts as a rap. It comes into my head and I memorize the first 8 to 10 lines without even having written them down. And then I might go and sit down and write them. Sometimes it starts with just a word that I want to brainstorm, and I'll do a massive brainstorm on a whiteboard and think of as many words that rhyme with it, that have to do with it, many places where it is, many sights and smells and sounds, and I'll list them all on a whiteboard, and then on the other side of the whiteboard I'll start throwing the ingredients into the salad. So there's many different ways to do things, and I get bored easily. I'm a little bit ADD, so I'm kind of like, I can't do it the same way every time and sit in the same spot. If I need to write something that's more hip-hop, I'll use my laptop. If I need to write something that's like a love poem, I'll use pen and paper and light a cheesy romantic candle. I'll go to cafes to write stuff about people. There's just different places, different things that are affecting us as artists, and I like to be immersed in them.
What are you doing with Signal at the moment?
Yeah, so we're teaching a bunch of young people who are making stuff. I like to facilitate things where I'm not teaching you how to write or how to sound like me, but I'm giving tools that they can use to bring out their own voices, which is really important, and I think they're really doing that. We're working towards a performance on the 26th here, actually, at the front. And they've been working really, really well. There's also some dances, there's dance workshops and musician or music workshops going on at the same time, so it's going to be a collaboration in the end. But this first week has just been about generating text and making stuff, yeah.
So do you do a lot of work with young people, and you find that really important, don't you?
Yes, I do a lot of work with young people. I've been lucky enough, I started doing workshops in 2006 in Brisbane. I've always liked young people. I've always liked teaching. I'd been writing hip hop already for a little while, and I did my first set of workshops as all hip hop workshops. So I've kind of come from that world. But since I've become more successful as a poet, people have been like, "Oh, can you do poetry workshops?" I'm like, "Okay." So I've done one of my favorite workshops was in China, in Beijing. There's kids in Beijing that they call them, well, their parents would be migrant workers, and they're migrant young people. That doesn't mean they've come from overseas. China's so big that it means they've come from other parts of China into Beijing, but they don't have Beijing residency cards, which you need to have if you want to go to public school. So there's these schools that have been set up via donation, and I got to go in and do workshops there with a translator in Mandarin, and I was doing a workshop. He was translating my workshop. The kids wrote in characters, made their poems. They got up and performed, and he translated their poems back to me so I could tell whether they'd followed my instructions, and it was really, really amazing, and they're really great people. And then in the States, in the Bronx, I did some workshops. I've done a lot of workshops in Indigenous communities in Australia. I've been really lucky in that way as well. Melbourne, all over the place, from like 5 years old to 50, 85 years old. There's some really awesome closet elderly women that are rappers in the world. Every time I do a workshop, there's some lady that's like, "Oh, after your workshop, I was going home and I was like, the car has stopped, we're in traffic, and I'm here trying not to panic." And then I'm just like, you're a rapper, this is awesome. So like, I think there's just this thing where you start making words sound good and you start having fun with them, and it doesn't need to sound like anybody else, and people just start expressing themselves and sharing stories, and I think that's beautiful.
Thanks for answering my questions. Does anyone else have any questions for Luka?
Who's your favourite hip hop artist?
Who's my favorite hip hop artist? Oh, the question. Can I just list some so I don't hurt anybody or my own feelings by saying one person? So Tupac will probably be my all-time dude. Jean Grey is a New York female rapper. That's really cool. Lupe Fiasco lyrically has influenced me. I like lots of different rappers for different reasons. I like Eminem for his wordplay and his work on syllables. He rhymes within syllables, not just the ending of words. I don't always like his subject matter, but he's a beast in terms of like rhyming every single sound in a word rather than just the end of words. And then Nas for being fairly conscious as an MC. Same with Pharaoh Munch. And then in Australia, a friend of mine, Omar Musa, El Fresh, the Lion from Sydney. Who else? Earth Boy, sometimes. There's a lot of different people that have just got a lot of different skills, you know, and I kind of like them for different reasons. And I'm sure there's a million of them I'm forgetting. There's actually some really good Middle Eastern rappers. There's a guy named The Narcissist from Montreal in Canada, who's Iraqi background, and another guy named Omar Effendum. I met them when they came out in Melbourne. I've also been able to collaborate with a crew in Athens in Greece last year called Active Member. And I love them because when hip-hop was turning to be quite stereotypical and superficial in Greece, when rappers started coming in the 80s, and rappers started talking about women and being sexually, you know, provocative and just talking about superficial kind of stuff, this one guy was like, "I don't want anything to do with that." They're like, but they were having a big hip-hop meeting. He's like, "I don't want to have anything to do with that. You guys want to call that hip-hop? I want to call what I do low bap." A whole different name. 20 years later, he is like the godfather of hip-hop, or low bap, in Greece. And there's a festival every year, and he tours constantly, and there's like 100 different other bands and rappers that are out there going, "I'm low bap, I'm not hip-hop." So I really love the culture of hip-hop all around the world. It's really diverse and changing. There's great hip-hop there's a band called Orishas from Cuba that are off just like crazy. I think we kind of get insulated because all we get is just hyper, like just American stuff. That's all we get, you know, but there's so much good stuff here and in other countries. Yeah, so I'm diverse in my, it's a hard question to answer, as you can tell. Can I give you a performance?
Yes.
I was wondering if that was going to happen. Yes, but I'll do it without the mic. I think it would be better. I thought I was going to get away with it. So can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Kind of.
Yeah, kind of. I'll do loud. I'll go loud. Please resist me. Colonize me. Compromise me. Conflict me. Please don't risk me. If you see me at the airport, please come and frisk me. Please resist me. Colonize me, compromise me, and conflict me. Please don't risk me. Please call me stupid because your resistance brings my evolution. Please resist me. Because resistance brings evolution. And you've resisted me so consistently, I thank you for your contribution. I am a happy man. Your stupidity has made me strong. I've developed wings, a thick skin, and this here opposable thumb. It holds my pen which loads my explodable tongue, so without loading a gun I'm killing high quarters of unemotional punks. Sorry. You also taught me to speak French. I learned it when you kept keeping me at arm's length, and then I learned Italian just to expand my head, and Greek to learn from where my ancestors had fled, and then I learned some Yanua just to show the people of this land some respect. You see, it's been your example that has led me to leave you for dead. So don't trust me. I'm risky. Insurmountable, unaccountable, I'm an undeniable, unreliable, monarchical liability. I find soliloquies and my liturgies literally leave a literary litany. You see, when I was little, they told me I was illegitimate, illiterate, and limited. Little did they know that in a minute I'd be killing it. I'm vivid like it's cinnamon, so my synonym is vividness. I stick it like I'm cinnamon and kill it like a militant. I live it like a citizen, you live life like imprisonment. Besides, indigenous immigrant might be the most legitimate of citizens, so it's better to live a life like us, isn't it? Thank you.
Amazing. Does anyone else have any questions? Or?
How do you remember all your songs? I know that's a strange question, but I always wonder that.
That is not a strange question. That is an important question, and it is actually like, it's almost like some people really discount that. Like some young people that I'm working with are like writing a poem, they're like, cool, it's done. I'll read it out, it's done, you know? But actually the memorization steps your performance up from a good performance to an amazing performance. You really need to own your work. I actually kind of say that unless I've performed it, I've memorized it, right? And then I've performed it 10 times in front of a crowd, then I know the poem. And then I can start really performing it and owning it and playing with it, slowing down, speeding up. Yeah? It was quite loud just then. It's quite hot in here. I had to change the poem and the performance of the poem to meet this space. You can't do that unless you know it inside out, right? So to do that, there's a few different things. I record it onto my laptop or whatever, put it on my iPhone and walk around like an idiot repeating it over and over again in a park or somewhere. Yeah, so it's about movement for me as well. I can't just sit down and stare at it. It's not going to do it. It needs to be in my body more. I need to actually walk around and repeat it over and over. You can, if you write it out 6 times, usually that will help you get it. You can learn it in sections, so you learn the first 8 lines, just do that for a day. Drop it, learn the next 8 lines, do that for a day. The funny thing is that the outcome is kind of beautiful or cool if you're into hip-hop, and a lot of hip-hop heads come to my workshops and go, oh cool, I want to be a rapper, yeah. But it's actually, the process is quite dorky, you know, to get to that point where you've got it, you know. So you just have to sit down and do all this stuff where you're just memorizing it, writing it out over and over, performing it over and over, listening to it over and over. If it's a poem, sometimes it's good to record it with a backing track of anything, because your mind, it's like those language learning tape song, and it's like, Je m'appelle Luke. And it's like, boom, 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 Je m'appelle Luke. And the reason why they've got music behind it is because it makes it easier to memorize when there's a beat or there's sounds that go with it. So, so sometimes I'll do it with that, with a beat in the background, and before you know it, you've got it. And I think I also sacrifice other things. I'm terrible with names, terrible with dates. People remind me of things I've done, and I'm like, really? So I think I'm kind of, I've got about 2 hours worth of, well, probably more, of poems and songs in my head. So, and they're like really like there. If you said do this one, I could do it, you know? So I think you got to sacrifice other things maybe, but that's when you get to a big, when you're memorizing a lot of them. But you got to do what works for you, and it's really important. It's a really important part of the process. Anyone else?
Do you find that you have a content that you want to express that defines every poem that you make, or do you sometimes just have a turn of phrase that, you know, comes to you and like that's the thing that I want to build around?
Yeah, both, man. Both. So sometimes it's like Please Resist Me, that piece is like, all right, I want to talk about this issue and I want to do it the best way I can, you know? So that poem was done with the blackboard process, the whiteboard process, where I just found lots of words that rhymed, a lot of things around a theme. It's got repetition in it, which is always good to anchor the crowd to the meaning of your poem. It's got a crescendo. It's quite an easy kind of, it's a quite typical slam piece to have start off softer and go to a crescendo. And that was formed because of a theme. And then, yeah, other times it's like, all right, I want to talk about, there's a love poem I had called The Confluence, and confluence is about, that word means two rivers that come together to become one. So I wanted to use that word to express a relationship that I'd had with somebody becoming one. And so, yeah, I just brainstormed the theme over and over and over again until I found things that worked and rhymed. So, yeah, it depends what comes. Yeah.
Where do you see your work going in the future? Like, are you going to continue on with slam poetry?
Where do I see my work going in the future? I probably won't enter slams so often. I don't see myself entering the National Slam again for a little while. I'm making an album at the moment that is much more musical than poetry, but I wouldn't call it hip-hop. I've approached every song as a poet rather than a rapper. So everything is quite poetic, but it's not necessarily a hip-hop album. I will be touring again this year. I'll be touring with that crew in Greece for a month, which is exciting for me because I've grown up in Australia and done so much work in Australia and never really been considered as a hip-hop artist until I started doing poetry, and then people are like, yeah, that's, you know, we like you as a poet, I guess, so it's working for me. I spent 1 week in Greece with this crew in Athens, and all of a sudden I'm doing a national tour. I did an interview for national television over there yesterday. Like, it's just taking off there, so I'm gonna see where that takes me. And continue to come back to Australia and come back to Melbourne and to my hometown of Brisbane and do workshops with young people. And I don't want to, even though I'm reaching for something up here, I also don't want to forget about the grounded work that really feeds my heart, you know? Like, as an artist, it's quite hard to kind of trying to become something that's more public and more mainstream, I guess, in a way, if I could say that word. And then at the same time, not lose sight of actually what's good for you as a human being, you know? And poetry is what I love. I don't want to end up hating it because I'm doing it for the wrong reasons, so, yeah.
Thank you so much for chatting. I can't wait to see what you're doing with the Singing Crew next weekend. Thanks again.